Hello and welcome to another video review. This is Crysis for PC. Now, unlike Crytek's previous title, Far Cry, this didn't come out of nowhere. We had expected this for quite a while. We had seen it leading up to that, and we're like, ooh, this is going to be epic. And it ended up being the benchmark for PCs in terms of how good your hardware is for years to come. In fact, still today, it's still a good benchmark. And the simple reason for this is this game is extremely resource intensive. Basically, if you can run it on the absolute highest settings, in basically DirectX 10 mode, because it was before DirectX 11, but DirectX 10 mode on absolute max settings and get a consistently good frame rate, you've basically got the beast computer of absolute devastation plus 9001. It is extreme resource hog, even today, even after patches, and they actually went in when they released Crysis Warhead, which is the standalone expansion. They had actually optimized a few processes in the game, so it actually ended up looking better and running better at the same time, which is kind of ironic. So Crysis 1 still remains the benchmark, even though Crysis Warhead still looks better and plays better. It's mostly because Crysis 1 is still the resource hog. Now, in terms of graphics, this game still looks amazing. Still, even after 4 years, it still looks absolutely amazing. And in my personal opinion, it looks better than Crysis 2. Now, I think that's mostly because the environments in Crysis 1 are these massive, massive jungle islands. And the draw distance is absolutely gigantic. There's tons of stuff going on, amazing, just everything. It just feels right. Because you look at this environment, you're like, okay, this almost looks real. And that's where it really just puts all of its strength in terms of the graphics. It's very almost photorealistic. And that ends up looking absolutely amazing. Now, I, for one, am not really a big fan of photorealistic graphics. But in Crysis's case, I can forgive it, because it still contains that sci-fi fantasy element just enough to keep it from the drudgery of just every other military shooter out there. And so you get some pretty cool designs in there. The modeling is absolutely great. The animations themselves they're not bad, but neither are they that great. They just kind of do their job, and they don't really detract from or add to anything. They're just there. Now, granted, the alien animations are really cool, but I know that's a spoiler, but it's really not that big of a spoiler. But it's kind of interesting to look at like the facial animations, for instance, because you really didn't see stuff like that to that level of detail until Crysis. Once you see Crysis do it, you start seeing other games start really getting into that and improving it. But even by today's standards, though, all the graphics in Crysis are still absolutely phenomenal. Textures, shaders, everything just looks great. Now, one thing I should mention, between DirectX 10 and 9 modes, now I run it in DirectX 9, and it honestly doesn't look any better in DirectX 10. I mean, the textures are a little bit sharper, the shaders are a little bit more crisp, but other than that, it really didn't change all that much. And the performance drop is just absolutely massive between DirectX 9 and DirectX 10. So, as far as the benchmark goes, sure, you're going to run it in DirectX 10, but as far as the actual gaming goes, you'll probably run it in DirectX 9 just because it doesn't look any better in DirectX 10. Because at the time this was released, DirectX 10 was still kind of in its infancy, so we didn't really have that noticeable difference between DirectX 9 and DirectX, say, 11 that we do now. So, overall, the graphics are still phenomenal, but DirectX 10 was definitely not used to its full potential. Now, of course, the sound design is also something that was really well done. All of the weapon sounds, all of the environmental effects, all that just sounds absolutely phenomenal. The voice acting, on the other hand, is kind of just there. It does its job. It's average, I guess is the proper term. You don't really notice any characters that you'd really become attached to just necessarily on their voices and their acting. The strength of the writing isn't that great either, but I'll get to that in a minute. But anyway, the overall sound design is actually very well done. The music it's kind of your stock action adventure orchestral music, and it works pretty well. There's some tracks on there that are pretty good, but overall it's not anything particularly memorable. The sound design itself, overall, it works great, because when you're actually playing the game and you're hearing all the gunfire and the people's chatter as they're reacting to things and everything, that all sounds absolutely great. But when you listen to the music, it's just kind of like, it's there. And you listen to the voice acting, and you're kind of like, whatever. And then we come to the story and the gameplay. Now, the basic story is you play as Nomad, and you're a U.S. Special Forces agent. And you're sent in with your squad of nanosuit-clad super soldiers, basically, to assess the North Korean interest in an island and this facility thing going on, and to extract hostages. And it takes a massive spiral to the crazy in the middle of that. And if you've seen anything about Crysis 2, which you probably have more than this, because Crysis 2 was released on consoles as well, then you should know that in Crysis, basically aliens are the central point. And in Crysis 1, they don't handle that transition very well. It goes from basically, okay, the KPA are doing this and that, and so eventually we had to start fighting them and all this kind of stuff, to suddenly aliens! And it's very sudden, very abrupt, in terms of the shift in power from the game focus. Now, the aliens are present throughout the game. That's painfully obvious from pretty early on, to be perfectly honest with you. So it really shouldn't come as any surprise that there are aliens in the game. That they're designed they remind me kind of War of the Worlds. They almost look like octopuses, or octopi, however you say it. But they almost look kind of like that. And it's a cool design. It's pretty unique in terms of first-person shooters, and their movement and everything was kind of cool to look at. But story-wise, when the aliens pop in, the story just takes a massive spiral downwards into, okay, we've done this before, and it's kind of stupid now. And so then you kind of start ignoring the story and just go with the gameplay. Now, up until the aliens, the gameplay consists basically of playing like Far Cry. You sneak around in the jungle if you want to. I mean, you can run in guns blazing if you want to as well. I mean, it's left open to you. But the difference between this and Far Cry is that you have a nanosuit in this, so you can engage in armor mode, cloak mode, which is basically like the invisibility from AVP and the Predator movies as the Predator. And you can increase your strength. You can also increase your speed. Now, if you increase your strength, you can jump higher. If you increase your speed, you can just run like crazy and switch weapons faster. If you engage cloak mode, it drains your energy really quickly, but it is kind of cool that people can not see you when you're doing that. And so this game really does lend itself very well to a bunch of different play styles. But for what ends up happening is most of the time you're going to be doing stealth, at least if you play on the higher difficulties, because suddenly your armor mode becomes basically tissue paper. On the higher difficulty settings, the armor mode is practically useless. It's, for all intents and purposes, just nothing is activated. And that's it for most of the game, actually. It only drains your energy when you get hit by any sort of damage whatsoever. Whereas strength mode drains your energy when you're jumping and when you're doing melee attacks. And speed mode drains your energy when you sprint. And that's about it. So what ends up happening is you play in armor mode most of the game. You move the slowest in armor mode. And you switch to the others when necessary. And what I ended up doing was just sneaking around most of the time, and that was actually pretty satisfying, to be perfectly honest with you. It was actually really cool to be able to just hide in the jungle in cloak mode, and then quickly switch out of cloak mode, take a guy out, go back into cloak mode, and then have the other guys sitting there freaking out about where did that come from, who's attacking. Now, it did get quite annoying, because the AI in Crysis is not particularly great. It's not bad by any means, but it's not great either. For some reason, they can still spot you no matter what. And that didn't make a lot of sense to me. I mean, if you're in cloak mode, why should they be able to see you? Especially if you're stationary. I mean, if you're moving, you can see like a shimmer, and that I can see where they would notice that. But if you're stationary and you're just like say laying on the ground in the lowest possible position for them to spot you and all that, how are they still able to see you from like, you know, half a mile away or something like that? It didn't make a lot of sense to me. But eventually you learn to deal with it, and it's just kind of like, okay, whatever. Now, until you get to the aliens, you're basically just fighting KPA, and eventually you fight nanosuit-clad KPA. And the basic strategy is this: aim for the head, because if you shoot them in the torso, you're going to be wasting a lot of ammo. Because eventually they start wearing a lot of armor, and it really becomes annoying to shoot anything but the head. And so your aim actually ends up having to be really good by the end of the game. Now, I keep mentioning aliens because this is where the game takes a massive downfall. Up until the aliens, the gameplay is actually pretty fun. It's fun to sneak around in the jungle. It's fun to just feel like you're this super soldier smashing through everything. Once the aliens come in, you no longer feel like a super soldier. You feel like a bug being crushed. Because the difficulty spike between when you're fighting the humans and when you're fighting the aliens is massive. Now, granted, I did play it on the second hardest difficulty for my first playthrough, so it's not like I wasn't begging for punishment to begin with. But seriously, the difficulty spike is massive. Because not only can the aliens, that you're never given a name for them either, they're just the aliens. Not only can they fly, but they're fast, they're very hard to hit, and they take a lot of damage before they go down. Now, if you've got a lot of ammo for your really powerful weapons, like say your Gauss rifle, if you have plenty of ammo for that, which you only get on the very last level where there's tons of ammo for it, then it's not so big a deal because that takes them down fairly quickly. But if you're using your assault rifle, which is what you have for most of the game, you're lucky to hit them, and if you able to hit them, you're lucky to do enough damage to take them down. So, once these aliens actually come in, it's a massive difficulty spike. They annihilate you very easily because they have pinpoint accurate fire, and it's continuous. So, unless you're like behind cover, you're pretty much screwed. And they come from everywhere. They're really fast. They're really hard to hit. And so it ends up just being extremely annoying when the aliens pop in. So eventually you're going to say, okay, that's enough. Unless you really have to see the ending, which, to be perfectly honest with you, the ending sucks. It's very just... It's definitely a cliffhanger, but still, it's kind of lame. But, anyway, basically, the story and just the single player in general, it's good up until the aliens, but once it hits the aliens, it takes a massive spiral downwards. Then you go to the multiplayer, which is extremely basic. There are two modes in this game. You have instant action, which is deathmatch, and there's no team modes except for power struggle. You have power struggle as your team mode, and instant action is your deathmatch with free-for-all kind of thing. Power struggle can basically be summed up as Battlefield. It's basically your conquest mode from Battlefield, where you fight as a team to control certain positions. You can use a lot of vehicles, that sort of thing. Now, they decided to go a little bit different of a route and throw in the buy system, sort of like in Counter-Strike, where you actually had to buy all your equipment with prestige points, and you earn those by like getting kills. And eventually you like level up and stuff like that. So it's an interesting system. Unfortunately, it doesn't work very well. I never really felt like I was rewarded properly for actually playing the game. I mean, I felt more like it was a hindrance than anything else, because if you jump into a game and it's not the very start of the game where everybody has nothing, then you're going to get annihilated. So it seems kind of like a more unfair mechanic than anything else. But the instant action is easily the worst deathmatch mechanic I have played in years. This is an extremely unbalanced game. And by that I mean, the Gauss rifle kills you in 1 to 2 shots, depending on if the shooter was really, really bad or not. And if you put strength mode on and then just punch somebody, it's an instant kill no matter what. instant. So what people end up doing is exploiting the game. They'll use Gauss rifles, they'll use explosives, because you get claymores too. So they'll just trap areas and you'll just blow up. There's really nothing you can do to counter those claymores either. So they're actually worse than in Call of Duty. But the Gauss rifle, it is hard to hit things with the Gauss rifle, to be perfectly honest with you. So it is actually something that's not as annoying. But that punch mechanic, that people just spam it. And what they'll end up doing is they'll use speed mode to get close enough, and then they'll switch on strength mode and just punch you and kill you instantly, before you can even react. And so, I get the feeling that Crytek really didn't do any testing of the multiplayer beforehand. And overall, I feel like they didn't actually do much testing in the game at all. I mean, it is fairly bug-free. I mean, I didn't notice anything glaring. Occasionally things would, like, for instance, pop out of the world and stuff, but that was pretty rare. But other than that, I really didn't notice anything. There are a lot of performance issues, but I mean, that's just the engine itself. But it's really the gameplay that's the most broken. They tease you in the single player by giving you one of the best weapons in the game, the Scar assault rifle. It's easily the better of the two assault rifles, but you don't get any ammo for it until basically the end game. So they're just teasing you with it, and it's like, ugh. But so overall, the gameplay is pretty good up until the aliens, but overall, I really can't recommend this game unless you're just going to use it for benchmarking. But so it's a good idea, but it's very badly done. A lot of people seem to either love or hate this game. I'm not one of the ones that hate it, but it's really just nothing special. I didn't really find anything memorable about Crysis apart from the graphics and the benchmarking prowess. And that's really what people use it for. They don't play this game because it's a good game. They play it because they want to benchmark their system to see how powerful it is. And overall, that's what it does best. So, is it a good game? Not really. Is it a good benchmark? Definitely. So if you're wanting to use this as a benchmark, then go for it, because it's going to be a great benchmark. But if you're going to play this as a game, you're probably not going to enjoy it. I give it a 2 out of 5, and thanks for watching.